Welcome to Truth Jihad Radio. I'm Kevin Barrett, looking for truth on all the most important issues that are not being properly covered in the mainstream. One of those, maybe the mother of all such issues, is 9/11. And we're back again with an annual event. Happens every March 14th or thereabouts, and that is the 9/11 physics debate. March 14th is Einstein's birthday, so every year, it's been 6 years up now, we get together with Rick Shattuck of Aneta.org. That's the Association for 9/11 Truth Awareness. And we look for physicists who are willing to defend the official story of what supposedly happened to the 3 high-rises in New York. And so far, nobody seems to be willing to defend the official story. We do have Dr. Crockett Grabbe, an esteemed and accomplished physicist, to, shall we say, debunk the official story. We couldn't find anyone to debate him once again. So, Rick Shattuck, tell us briefly about how you tried to find someone to defend the official story of the destruction of the World Trade Center high-rises.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. Aneta, the Association for 9/11 Truth Awareness, is at 1629 K Street in Washington, D.C., and myself and volunteers email every year to over 30 university physics departments describing the debate and asking if anyone would be willing to explain how the official story is possible, the complete collapse of the World Trade Center towers, and how that's consistent with Newton's laws of motion.
For example, we went to the website CalTech.edu, then Department of Physics, chairperson, and called Dr. Fiona Harrison.
Good afternoon, Fiona Harrison's office. This is Stephanie.
Hello, this is Rick Shattuck, and I'm calling Dr. Harrison about the upcoming 9/11 physics debate, and wonder if she got my email and message. We're trying to find a PhD. We've been trying for 3 years to find a PhD in physics.
So, right, I spoke with you, was it last week? Late last week?
Oh.
When you phoned?
Oh, okay.
Yes, I gave her the message.
Okay, very good.
She's out on travel now.
Oh, okay. Do you know of any other PhDs in physics? It would be great if we could have 2 PhDs from CalTech, because Dr. Crockett Grabbe, who's
right.
Questioning the George Bush, Dick Cheney story, is a graduate in honors from CalTech. So it would show that they're equally matched.
Can you spell your last name again for me,
yes.
please?
Shaddock. And the debate is coming up. It's within a couple weeks. It's going to be on Einstein's birthday.
Right, I remember. And your phone number?
It's 202-829
202-829
4444.
4444. And you're calling from what group again?
It's the Association for 9/11 Truth Awareness.
Okay.
1629 K Street in Washington, D.C.
For 9/11 Truth Awareness.
Lobbying for a new investigation about 9/11. Okay. Well, thank you.
I will make sure she gets the message again.
Yeah, or anyone in the department. But so far...
And you wanted a PhD in physics, right?
Yeah, PhD in physics with a Hirsch index at least 10.
Oh, okay.
And that's...
index of 10.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Fiona has a very high one. You can look it up on Google Scholar, and it's a measure, the H index they call it, is often used for tenure decisions, how much a scientist has published and how many times their work has been favorably cited.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
But
Thank you so much.
we'll take any PhD in physics from CalTech at this point. We're running out of time to find someone who's willing to defend the official story.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
So the challenger requirements are that they be a PhD in physics from accredited university, and either 10 papers published in independent scientific research journals or Hirsch Index of at least 10, which Dr. Grabbe does, and membership in the American Physical Science Society or international equivalent. So the qualified candidates who want to defend the official story could respond to us, and as an incentive, we're offering 0.911 Bitcoin Cash. That's a derivative of Bitcoin, and many feel that it's more in line with the original idea and formula of Satoshi Nakamoto. So 0.911 Bitcoin. Today's Bitcoin Cash is about 130, and 0.911 would come to about, we want to offer at least $119 for the honorarium. That's 911 backwards, to reverse the story that brought us to all these wars and loss of civil liberties. So Dr. Grabbe has been debater before in the 2016 debate. It started with Dr. David Griscom in 2014. Then he debated again in 2015. He has a Hirsch index of about 52 and is a graduate of Brown University and has been a recipient of many scholarly awards. We have also had Dr. Stephen Jones, PhD in physics, one of the first scientists to study 9/11. And last year, Professor David Chandler was the award recipient of the debate. So we have all these physicists who are willing to question the official story, and there seems to be an assumption that there are a lot of physicists out there who go along with the official story, but where are they? They're not coming forward. And so-called skeptics, such as Dr. Michael Shermer of the Skeptic Society, who is near CalTech and often gives speeches there, which is Dr. Crockett Grabbe's alma mater. So none of these so-called skeptics come forward. So, well, take it away, Dr. Grabbe. You've written some books on 9/11 and have papers and made videos. One of those, National Swindle of the World Trade Center, which is available on Amazon. So if you tell us a little more about your work in the field of 9/11.
What I want to do today is show a video. It's entitled "The Real Demolition of the World Trade Center on 9/11." It's a 45-minute video. Will be it's divided into 9 topics. Okay,
well, we can show that video. Yeah, it's in the absence of a challenger, so we might as well use the time to explain some of the work that you've been doing.
Abraham Lincoln once said, "If given the truth, the people came to be depended upon to meet any national crisis. The great point is to bring them the real facts." Hello, I am Crockett Grabbe, an experienced physicist, and I want to present how the World Trade Center was really demolished on 9/11. Topic 1. Before 9/11. The CIA intercepted the plans in fall of 1998 of Osama bin Laden's group to hit the World Trade Center with airplanes, almost 3 years before 9/11. Those in the U.S. government with access to this highly classified information had approximately 3 years to analyze not only how to respond, but also how to potentially exploit these plans. Some of these interclassified circles probably saw the potential for blaming the terrorists for whatever happened. Recall that the federal government did not pre-announce 9/11. That having the effect of surprise in potential exploitation. Within months of the interception of the World Trade Center plans, the Department of Justice, FEMA, and the National Fire Administration produced this upgraded document for response to the terrorist World Trade Center attacks, showing gun sites on the North Tower. They knew the Twin Towers were targets of terrorists. 1.5 years later, the incumbent Bush administration downplayed these facts. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Paul Wolfowitz claimed Saddam Hussein and Iraq were a bigger threat than Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. 2 months before 9/11, the FBI warned the government officials at both Washington, D.C. and New York that Osama bin Laden was sending students to U.S. flight schools. Shortly afterwards, the Bush administration received clear intelligence that, quote, Osama bin Laden was determined to strike in the United States. It was clearly laid out to them by National Security Advisor Richard Clarke. Several who knew of the coming attacks made investments in stock options that substantially increased in value. Kevin Ryan, in around 2010, published a paper in Foreign Policy Journal on these pre-9/11 investments. That paper is reprinted in Jesse Ventura and Dick Russell's book on 63 documents the government doesn't want you to read. The terrorists hijacked the planes, and Vice President Cheney apparently stood down the military response to them, so the terrorists crashed him into the World Trade Center towers. Now, as documented in the book 63 documents, the Pentagon changed the response policy on June the 1st of 2001. So the stand-down could have resulted from neither Vice President Cheney nor Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld giving the order of their fighter jets to intercept the planes. Why? Topic 2. The scene on 9/11. The scene of planes hitting the Twin Towers is shown schematically here in Figure 2. This shows where the remnants of the planes crashed. Note, much of the American Airlines plane hitting the North Tower stayed within the tower, whereas the South Tower plane went through as it hit to the side. The towers were built with many different core columns running all the way down to the tower's foundation below ground, whereas the planes hit each tower in the upper segment. Yet the South Tower collapsed 56 minutes after the plane hit it, and the North Tower collapsed an hour and 42 minutes after the plane hit it. Then almost 7 hours after that, Building 7 collapsed. It had never been hit by a plane. Furthermore, it had been announced on TV by BBC in England as having collapsed 23 minutes before it actually did. And notice in this figure, World Trade Center 7 is across the street from the west of the World Trade Center buildings. A few have claimed that in 9/11, no planes hit the towers. Yet passenger lists for these planes have been listed online for years. And that's shown in the following figure, Figure 3. If these photos of the planes and their collisions were faked, these established lists of passengers would have to have been faked as well. So let us look into a video on YouTube entitled The Second Plane Crash View from Inside, which shows the plane crash at the South Tower from the bottom of the tower. The video shows that after the collision, a fireball came out of the South Tower where all the plane's fuel spilled out of the tower above, and that much nearby commotion was created by the collision, including the firemen calling Mayday, Mayday. Then there was a telling view shown in this Figure 4 here. Several seconds after the South Tower collision and fireball, the remnant of the moving plane comes out of the tower. What you see in this figure are two badly serrated and bent wings with a connector holding them together, and one of the engines still operating and producing exhaust. the plane's fuselage containing all the passengers has separated from that remnant and crashes below on the top of Building 5 of the World Trade Center. The other engine of the plane also separated from that remnant. This remnant continued flying for 3 blocks past the World Trade Center before hitting the ground, as shown in the schematic. So the wreckage of the United Airlines ends up in 3 places. The fuselage is on Building 5. The landing gear from the flying remnant is 3 blocks past the World Trade Center. And the other separated engine is about a half a block from that. Now, American Airlines 11 hitting the North Tower struck more solidly in the center of the tower. The landing gear remnant of that plane continued on through the tower and crashed 3 blocks away from it in the opposite direction to the landing gear from the South Tower, because the plane was going in the opposite directions. The crash remains of the planes hitting the South and North Tower in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon are all displayed online in 9/11 research papers on the World Wide Web. In Figure 5 is the World Trade Center in the aftermath of 9/11, which looks like a war zone with buildings blown up. Hence, it was given the name Ground Zero. There is white dust over much of the area, but there's no evidence of smoke anywhere in that photo. White dust is also fallen on many of the buildings and the ground. Fires did not bring the buildings down, explosions did, producing the white dust. This following table was first presented in late 2005 by Steve Jones on the major evidence for explosions, for explosive demolition of the World Trade Center towers. The first item is unknown set of collapses. Second, the rapidly expanded huge dust cloud formations. Third, almost free-fall speed of each collapse that were virtually straight down. The fact you had total collapse of the North and South Tower and Building 7. And you had massive pulverization of the concrete and softer materials. That is why you produce all this white dust from the pulverization of concrete. You had multiple sounds reported and recorded and flashes observed of explosions. You have molten, sliced, and even evaporated steel. Fires are not hot enough to do this. And you had large demolition rings in the aftermath, as you can see here if you take a look at Figure 5 again. You had rapid horizontal ejections of multiple steel beams and squibs. Squibs were ascribed to be dust by the NIST Commission. The squibs were observed and the beams were observed traveling in all directions. You had exceedingly hot temperatures, much hotter than fires can produce. You have rapid collapse fires that have a problem that they violate energy and momentum, yet this is what NIST claims happened. There were no fires observed in the South Tower collapse, and there were only brief fires observed in the North Tower and World Trade Center 7 collapses. And no skyscrapers has ever collapsed due to fires. Now, the last item in this table refers to the historical record of skyscraper fires. Let's review that briefly. Topic 3. Cases of fire in skyscrapers. FEMA and the NIST committee repeatedly claimed fires had brought the buildings down, although they produced no evidence to support that. There were, in fact, several examples of raging fires in tall skyscrapers, none of which collapsed. Let us look at the worst one, that of the Windsor building that was caught on fire in Spain in 2005. This was the world's worst skyscraper fire. It was considerably worse than the fires in the World Trade Center towers. The fires raged on for 23 hours, much longer than the towers did. But all that was left was a standing skyscraper, a blackened skeleton. Nothing collapsed in that. The leftovers were not usable at all, but on the other hand, it was still sitting there. Examining all of the cases of major skyscraper fires leads to the conclusion that fires have never caused skyscrapers collapse. The World Trade Center buildings did not collapse from fires either, despite the NIST Committee's fallacious claims that they did. They claim that the towers' collapses were also aided by the plane crashes, but the plane crashes were high up and did nothing to destabilize them. In fact, the World Trade Center 7 collapsed when it was not hit by a plane. It was just another small skyscraper and had small fires in it. Now, one explosive used in the World Trade Center that was analyzed by an international group of scientists, and that was published in 2009. It was responsible for the very high heat produced. Topic 4. The extreme heat in nanothermite on 9/11. Despite the fact that the World Trade Center devastation showed no evidence of fires, it was extremely hot. It's shown by these NASA images taken from 6,500 feet up in an airplane. The extreme heat was observed with a visible infrared spectrometer by NASA 5 days after 9/11 and shows large areas with temperatures above 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit in the orange and the red. Even the green is above 800 degrees Fahrenheit. These are much hotter than fires could have produced. Now, Steve Jones, in his 2006 paper, first described the large quantities of molten metal observed under the crumpled remains of all 3 buildings that collapsed. He presents this photo from September 27th of 2001, which is 16 days after the collapse, that shows a crane picking up light yellow glowing metal nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit at the World Trade Center cleanup site. This very clearly was not created by fires, but by reactions producing the extreme heat. Jones also reports, quote, liquid metal forming in pools, unquote, a fact backed up by several additional sources. For example, in a video on YouTube created on these observations, 2 firefighters working with cleanup stated, you get down below and you would see molten steel running down the tunnel grooves, like you're in a foundry, like lava in a volcano. Other firefighters said the fire got very intense down there, and it actually melted beams where it was molten steel being dug up, unquote, and described the environment of steel as glowing orange and white. Another cleanup worker said he encountered, quote, some of the thickest steel you have ever seen bit into a pencil, unquote, implying both extreme temperatures and extreme force in the collapses. The YouTube video, entitled Proof the Government is Lying, stated NIST was committing fraud, and they denied these facts. 9/11 workers said, and 8 weeks later, we still got fires burning, with digging opening up plumes of smoke.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall from Building 6.
There were fires of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit below the ground.
Analysis of these rubber samples from the towers in Building 7 by an international group of scientists showed this was produced by nanothermite reactions. Nanothermite is a more virulent substance than the thermite the Army has always used that has been developed in the nanoscales. Thermite was always used to produce high temperatures, but the nanothermite is much more effective at doing this. This was found as microscopic red ray chips in the dust at the World Trade Center. What the scientists, which were led by Niels Harrit, a chemist from Denmark, concluded from their analysis, the explosive reaction of aluminum with iron oxide produces aluminum oxide with iron at temperatures less than 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The red chips are an explosive nanomixture with the gray chips iron oxide holders, as shown in this figure 11 here. The micro-enhanced explosion produces 3,000 degrees iron products, which exceeds the melting temperature of iron. In fact, the microscopic spheres of iron-rich in silicate materials shown in Figure 12 could only occur if temperatures reached the high 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Molten iron was viewed on the South Tower just before it collapsed by two independent sources, as shown in the next two figures. No melted aluminum would not produce this color, this brilliant orange-red color. The evidence unmistakably implies the conclusions. Iron melted came from nanothermal reaction. Iron-rich nanospheres seen were discovered in the dust found in the basement of all three collapsed buildings. Discovery of an explosive nanothermite prevalent in the dust proves it was one of the explosives used to demolish and pulverize the towers and murder nearly 3,000 people. It could not have been brought by the terrorists. As we'll see, another explosive, a more conventional one, was also used, and that produced the white dust. Topic 5. The South Tower demolition on 9/11. Seconds before the tower starts collapsing, both towers are smoking heavily because the fires before the collapse are so oxygen-starved. And that's as seen in this figure. The firemen are reporting, in fact, that the fire is almost extinguished in the South Tower. Then suddenly it starts collapsing. 4 seconds later, white material is streaming out in figure 16, most of the side of the South Tower, horizontally, below where the fires had been burning. Conservation of momentum shows that could only have been created by an explosion, with the explosive force creating outgoing momentum in all directions. The oncoming material from this explosion, which is a conventional one like TNT or RDX or C4, since it's not hot enough for the nanothermite reaction, the oncoming material has come right through the walls of the South Tower. Even after the penetration through these walls, it is still traveling quite fast. This figure 17 then shows a horizontal white streaming coming out, and it shows that it has gone almost 40 feet in the 3/4 of a second since the previous figure. The towers are 209 feet wide, so this is traveling about 50 feet per second. Note there are also sound waveforms that have imprints about the new gray dust that's starting to come out. These are where the fires have been. And the gray dust is starting to come out above where the white squibs were, because its emission was accompanied by loud explosive noise. About a second after the white material starts streaming at high velocities horizontal, figure 18 shows gray material begins coming out profusely in the floors above it. That appears to result from nanothermite explosions in the building, and the top starts descending. This major new explosion has occurred, sending the white squibs out at 90 feet per second. The top has come down about 70 feet, and it indicates the average collapse of the top rate of 100 feet per second. Notably faster than gravity could have possibly produced it so quickly. And also note that there is a break between the top part of the tower and the bottom part, which has virtually not moved. In 1/4 of a second, we have in this new figure 20, the top having come down another 30 feet in that 1/4 of a second. It's still collapsing at the rate of 100 feet per second. The final photo by this NBC camera over a second later shows the top segment of the tower has collapsed to half its original size. With all the exploded material coming out is gray dust. Notice that the lower segment of the tower has not moved. Several more conventional explosions were used to take that down. So let's summarize. in this table, Table 22, the physics principles known for centuries. There are two principles I want to talk about. The first is the energy E and the momentum proportional to velocity, which has both magnitude and direction. Those are conserved quantities. If the buildings collapse from fires, only gravitational energy is available. The most it can fall from gravity in 1.5 seconds is 36 feet because of the gravitational acceleration on Earth. But the South Tower observed to fall 140 feet in 1.5 seconds. It's observed to fall about 4 times as fast as gravity could bring it down. Currently, the acceleration is greater than the gravitational acceleration g. G cannot produce the sizable horizontal energy it's used. Explosions are necessary. And furthermore, the calculations have repeatedly shown that more than 10 times the amount of energy was used in the collapse of the towers as the energy that's available gravitational in the tower itself. How is the conservation of momentum satisfied for these horizontal ejections? These horizontal ejections, remember, are to the side, not downward for the cause of gravity, but in the horizontal ejection, the total momentum in the horizontal motion must balance. And the force containing ejections observed require a counterforce. So the horizontal ejections have material going in all directions and balancing. Only explosions can produce these observations. And if there are explosions high on the South Tower where the nanothermite melts metal, there is a tremendous force follow-up implosion at the top from the gradient of the pressure down to where the dust is poured out. Could this be called the cause of the collapse of the part of the tower instead of the gravitational accelerations that NIST claims? That can create the high rates of accelerations like those observed. The second principle is that no energy is available in gravitational freefall. You must have resistance to that freefall for work to be done. And the amount of work is the energy required to overcome that resistance. In the 3 collapses, that energy was all very low because of the rapid collapses. Physics principles that must be satisfied then show a lot about these collapses. They help explain much about the collapses, and the tremendous lean of the upper part of the tower is seen very much in this different angle view from the north. The tower has broken up where the power is broken off. The white dust came from pulverization of the concrete, the gray dust from the nanothermite, and we can see both of those separately, and you can see several pieces coming off along with the white dust. Let's look at another figure, figure 24. We see a later collapse stage in which the upper tower has just become gray dust, and in which explosions are sending out squibs in white dust in the lower part of the tower, and they have produced 2 very rapidly moving objects. These objects are this piece going down at a high speed right here, and a very small piece going over at hundreds of miles an hour. In figure 25, we see a huge white dust clouds enveloping the South Manhattan immediately on collapse of the tower. These white dust clouds, again, were created by the conventional explosions, whereas the nanothermite was very hot, and so it glowed well up into the air. Note that the South Tower exhibited no fires in its collapse. No smoke or fire played any role. The NIST committee's claim that fires brought it down were motivated by bias to heap all the blame on the terrorists and to cover up evidence of non-terrorist explosions. Topic 6. North Tower demolition on 9/11. The North Tower collapsed at 10:28 a.m., and the details of the fall of both the North and South Towers were ignored in the NIST Committee's 2005 final report on the collapse of the Twin Towers. Figure 26 shows flames coming outside the tower right as the collapse started, apparently a brand new creation. The flames leaping 50 feet into the open air imply a large amount of heat was produced in a very short time. That is, an explosion occurred. It appears to be from a nanothermite reaction, explosively onsetting at temperatures created by ordinary fires. The flames quickly disappear and are not seen in the rest of the North Tower collapse. Note the antenna on top of the tower is toppling, indicating damage at the center of the building of the core columns as resulting from these explosions. In Figure 27, just over a second later, the falling dust clouds around the tower have fallen down to the level of a large horizontal ejection coming out from the front. There's another horizontal ejection coming out 10 floors below that, and then another new ejection coming out the side. Notice the ejection out the side varies in density with position, and it is falling furthermore. The falling is showing that it's made up of particles of matter shooting out, not smoke, as the defenders of the NIST and FEMA version have claimed, like was claimed in Popular Mechanics, for example, in 1983. This Figure 28 shows the tower less than 2 seconds later, and a long 40-foot beam is emerging below the clouds on it. This beam came out of the tower. It is shown falling well below the descending cloud in Figure 29. On the left-hand side of the last three figures are streams moving material sideways, upward, as well as sideways, as well as downward. These forces cause collapse of the building, are acting in multiple directions to generate these momentum. So they could not have come from planes and the fires they created, in which gravity is the only force. These forces are clearly explosive in nature, a process creating large amounts of equal and opposite momentum. Now let's look at two figures, Figure 30 and 31, later in the collapse, that both show, Figure 30 shows a large 4,000 square feet piece of the tower surface falling on the left, and over 100 pieces are emerging from the descending dust cloud on the right-hand side of the tower, going out to 300 feet away from the tower. Note that the rising cone of hot material from a nanothermic explosive, which is also present in this next figure. The next figure is around the same time, coming from a different camera, viewed very shortly afterwards from the previous figure. Figure 31, on both sides, their smaller objects are emerging in the fall, and the figure shows more details at almost the same time from this other camera. It shows at least 4 large pieces of the surface, and there are many hundreds of beams and other large pieces visible. Observed going as far as 300 feet from the tower. All of these momentum came from the two explosions. Notice there's no smoke and fires in any of this chaos. The smoke is still standing at heights above where the building fell, and is still at the concentration it has been for the last hour and 42 minutes. The assertion by NIST investigating committees in their 2005 report that all of this was caused by the plane collisions and the fires created is preposterous. In Figure 32, we have an aerial view that shows 2 explosions. The larger one shows the white dust going down, and it is a conventional one, for example, C4 or TNT or RDX. And 2, the higher one shows the gray dust going up, and is a high temperature nanothermite one, likely producing the external flames seen in that Figure 23. In this second nanothermite explosion, the jet fuel fires producing the temperatures needed for the reaction, and extremely high temperatures are achieved or produce this notable rise in the dust. Immediately after the North Tower collapse, the vicinity for several blocks around it was swallowed up by the white dust from the fine concrete colonization by conventional explosions seen in this figure 33. The huge dust cloud combined the strong outward momentum created by the explosions, and that thoroughly engulfed much of South Manhattan. But on the other hand, the nanothermal reaction produced gases going up that were not anywhere near the ground. So the collapse is not at all compatible with the 2005 NIST report. We saw repeating examples of explosions, only the first of which briefly had an unusual fire with it. The rising gray dust and the lower bulk of the white dust were, like in the South Tower collapse, completely separate and fire-free. Momenta created in the collapse were in several directions upwards and sideways, as well as downward, which required explosive forces unlike that of fires. Many hundreds of pieces of the building were mixed with the white dust, and none of it showed any evidence of fires. This destruction by two explosions was not caused by the plane impacts or the fires they started, in contrast to the conclusions of the NIST report. Topic 7. Building 7 demolition on 9/11. Building 7, never hit by plane, collapsed 7 hours after the North Tower and 23 minutes after its collapse had been reported on the news by BBC. Many firefighters, fire officers, paramedics, and EMTs were told well before the collapse that Building 7 would be coming down. Guards went around and cleared the building, all people, so there would be no deaths. And when the building fell, after 5 p.m., it suddenly collapsed like a classic demolition in 6.5 seconds. Free fall off the top would be 6 seconds. On film, the building owners, Larry Silverstein, said in public they had decided to, quote, pull it, but then he never distinguished what pull it meant. The following table, constructed by David Chandler, a physics teacher out in Los Angeles, showed free fall for the first 3 seconds, a state that could only be produced by significant explosions initially on at least the lower floors of the building. The fall went from stationary to free fall speed almost immediately.
Anything at an elevated height has gravitational potential energy. If it falls and none of the energy is used for other things along the way, all of that energy is converted into kinetic energy, the energy of motion, and we call it free fall. If any of the energy is used for other purposes, there will be less kinetic energy, so the fall will be slower. In the case of a falling building, the only way it can go into free fall is if an external force removes the supporting structure. None of the gravitational potential energy of the building is available for this purpose, or it would slow the fall of the building. The fact of free fall by itself is strong evidence of explosive demolition, but the evidence is even stronger than that. My original analysis looks like this. I have since confirmed my measurement using a different software package. Both of these graphs plot velocity versus time. A straight line indicates constant acceleration, and the slope of the line indicates the rate of acceleration. What is particularly striking is the suddenness of onset of freefall. The acceleration doesn't build up gradually. The graph simply turns a corner.
David Chandler provided this information to NIST before they released the final report on Building 7. Despite these obvious facts, NIST produced their 2008 report that fires had brought it down. The online abstract of that report says, quote, it describes how the fires that followed the impact of debris from WTC-1, that's the North Tower, led to the collapse of WTC-7, unquote. Claiming that fires caused a 6.7 second symmetrical collapse is completely false. And as I pointed out in a previous book of mine, the report has the quality of a 19th century report on perpetual motion machines. It runs counter to the facts of statistical mechanics for any building fire ever. The fact that the NIST committee released this, especially after Chandler's analysis that he reported to them on the free fall, shows fraudulence. Topic 8. Ejections and trash from demolitions on 9/11. Solving the equations for ejections from buildings as a result of explosive forces shows these separate results, shown in Table 36. This is a table both for ejections of material 50 meters per second, which is just over 100 miles an hour, at a height of 400 meters up on the tower, which is just over 1,300 feet up, and for ejections at 150 meters on the building, which is just under 500 feet up. Here, alpha is a parameter for the size of the objects ejected. Log alpha is greater than -2 for hefty objects, for example, beams and pieces of the World Trade Center surface metal, but log of alpha is less than -3 for grains and dust. Dust travels several hundred feet, but is slowed by the air, whereas large objects ejected high at large velocities can go well over 1/4 of a mile away. The material ejected from the Twin Towers and the World Trade Center 7 that this table shows was responsible for the significant destruction of nearby objects. That is in spite of the fact that all of these pieces of paper coming out from the World Trade Center building collapses did not burn. These next three figures show examples of destruction of ejections that were done to nearby buildings. It also shows a destruction of a parked truck, a nearby truck, and to a nearby bus. And all of the three of the ejections create papers from the destroyed offices of the towers and the buildings. None of the papers are burning, despite the high temperatures, because fire retardant and the fine dust massively released from the towers when the concrete was pulverized into it are protecting the papers. There were no fires in the towers when they collapsed. So, as abundant evidence shows, explosions brought the World Trade Center buildings down and did considerable external damage. These are the facts of 9/11, and the 50 or so NIST reports are wrong. Topic 9. 21st Century American Fraud. Award-winning investigative reporter Ben Swan stated that the erroneous claims made before the early 9/11 Commission were summed up by senior counsel John Farmer. Quote, "In the course of our investigation into the national response to the attacks, the 9/11 Commission staff discovered that the official version of what had occurred on the morning of 9/11, what government and military officials had told Congress, the Commission, the media, and the public about who knew what when, was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. But the 9/11 Commission had hearings that were never recorded or open to the public. One witness testifying before those hearings was William Rodriguez, a North Tower janitor. He testified how he heard a series of explosions rocked the lower level of the World Trade Center minutes before the North Tower collapse. Apparently it was done to damage the foundation and aid in these collapses. Rodriguez was never acknowledged by the 9/11 Commission for either his testimony or for his heroics in leading several people to safety from the North Tower before it collapsed in on him and he dove under a fire truck. There were hundreds of witnesses to the World Trade Center events on 9/11. They saw and heard the explosions that brought the towers and Building 7 down and experienced the tremendous dust clouds they produced. One example of observations of the aftermath was reported to audiences by Father Frank Morales at St. Mark's Church in Manhattan. He was given the right to patrol the area around the World Trade Center, an area that was closed off to the public, and to perform prayers and last rites for the victims in that area. Then Father Frank Morales stated in an address at St. Mark's shortly after 9/11 that he was struck by the fact that for many blocks away from the towers, he would see multiple objects hanging on the sides of buildings. For example, on fire escapes, window ledges, plastered items against the walls, and on the street. These items would include various pieces of clothing such as shirts, pants, dresses, as well as books, papers, items of furniture, etc. His conclusion was that since the multiple buildings of which he saw items were so far away from the towers, and particularly in the position they were in, the only way they could have gotten there were by explosions of intense objects flying away for many blocks. He saw immediately after 9/11 what the evidence clearly shows. The firemen, police, medical workers, and volunteers for the cleanup attest to the very high heat and molten metal that was present, and they were exposed to the very toxic environment that was produced in the rubble. They knew the World Trade Center zone of destruction, shown at Ground Zero in Figure 5, was not produced by planes and fires as the DISC Committee claims in their many reports. Those claims are fraudulent and appear to be motivated by an effort to absolve U.S. officials and undercover agents for blame for the mass murder and injuries. So let the truth about 9/11 come forth. This image is a view over Manhattan before 9/11 that should never be forgotten. The truth about 9/11 should blossom and expose all who had a hand in these crimes. Then, and only then, will we be free of the massive casualties and heavy burden this nation has suffered for the 21st century because of 9/11. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Grabbe. We appreciate that very informative video. And we just have a couple of minutes left now, so I guess I'll turn it over to Rick Shattuck of aneta.org, the Association of 9/11 Truth Awareness, and Rick can award this year's prize to Dr. Grabbe.
Okay, on behalf of the Association for 9/11 Truth Awareness, since 11Physics PhD was willing to come forward, you win by default, Dr. Grabbe, so congratulations. And you'll be receiving 0.911 Bitcoin cash or the US dollar equivalent, whichever you prefer, to support your research. And your research is on, where can people find out more about your work?
Well, I have a site that's a lot of it's devoted to the work of 911 I've done. It's at sealane.org.
Okay, that's sea lane, like the ocean, sea lane.
Yeah, SEALANE.org.
Okay, great.
And find out more of that. Otherwise, write me. I could send you all sorts of stuff. But anyway, the main thing on the web would be that clane.org.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll link that at the Truth Jihad Radio blog, so people can go to truthjihad.com, click on the radio link, find your way to the post for today's show. This is the show done around Einstein's birthday, March 14th, 2019, and you'll find the relevant links to today's discussion. So thank you very much, Dr. Crockett Grabbe. I appreciate your work looking for 9/11 truth and doing so in a scientific manner. It's too bad we can't find any scientists who are willing to stand up and challenge your work and defend the official NIST version of what supposedly happened to the 3 World Trade Center high-rises. But so it goes. I think that silence speaks louder than words. And thank you, Rick Shattuck, for your work at the Association for 9/11 Truth Awareness. And I look forward to many more Einstein's birthday debates. Maybe someday we'll actually find somebody willing to defend the official story. But I'm not going to hold my breath until that happens.
Okay. All right.
All right.
All right. Thank you both. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.